Right then, here's an article I wrote on the 12th of October 2001 called Metal Invented at the Sabbath. Did Black Sabbath invent what we call heavy metal? Neil Adams thinks so. Here's my article. Should be used unedited, unexpurgated in some form, eventually one day, in some magazine or another. Okay, here we go. In the early 90s, thanks to so-called grunge, and Nirvana in particular, rock and heavy metal, and everything else that claimed itself to be, was starting to look more embarrassingly out of place than prog did when punk gobbed all over it in the mid to late 70s. It had long been all over for the classic lineups of Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. Most other bands from the era were considered dinosaurs or found themselves currently residing in the Where Are They Now file, as the comedy of Spinal Tap's appeal becoming more selective became a painful reality. In the late 80s, British metalers Judas Priest were still intact, but facing a bizarre court battle in the US, brought about by parents claiming their music had caused the suicides of their children by urging listeners to kill themselves via backwards speech that had supposedly been subliminally inserted into the one song on the album that was not written by Judas Priest, it should be noted. Ozzy Osbourne, lead singer with the original Black Sabbath, also faced a similar typically American court case after another self-inflicted shooting. Both cases were thrown out of court. At this point in time, the Judas Priest album in question had been out for over 10 years, and there are absolutely no other reports of fatalities amongst the several thousand other people who also bought Stained Glass, made at a time when the band could barely afford to eat, let alone afford sophisticated equipment to run recordings backwards. The album itself is yet more fine British rock music from a time when the cringeworthy cop-out term heavy metal didn't exist. What did exist was music made by post-Summer of Love longhairs sick of hearing about San Francisco, free love and flowers, while grafting away in British industrial suburbia, which was full of anything but good vibes, man. Flower power didn't work. Things got very nasty again, especially in Ohio. Some months before, the Hells Angels at Altamont killed more than a spectator that day. Audience members were not the only thing left battered and bruised after that harrowing December day that prematurely ended the 60s 3 weeks ahead of schedule with terrifying and tragic results, simply because black men with white, blonde, pretty women is not a thing that Neanderthals with Gestapo mentalities like to see. The whole 60s dream and its aspirations went down under a hail of pool cues as the whole trip finally went very bad indeed and became scary. At about the same time as this, ex-Jethro Tull guitarist Tony Iommi noticed how people quite happily paid money to be scared, by going to a cinema house opposite his band's rehearsal rooms to see the rising tide of Hammer horror films that sprang up around the late 60s and early 70s. He figured it would be a great idea to set horror to music and see if people enjoyed it as much as being scared by these films, and lo and behold, the essence of Black Sabbath's early music was born, and hippy-drippy crap counted its casualties. Black Sabbath's self-titled debut LP was indeed a horror movie set to music. The sleeve imagery, the falling rain, the crackling thunder, the tolling bell, the screams of disbelief as the people of Earth realised the Doomsday Book prophecies have come true. An image that gave the band an Ice Cube's chance in hell with the British music press, who panned the first album while dismissing Iommi as a Clapton wannabe. Like the Stones before them, they found it hard to shake off the demonic imagery that inevitably set them in very bad stead with the religious state of America, where they would have to tolerate armed police in their dressing rooms scanning their every move when not fighting off satanic lunatics who believed the band to be genuine devil worshippers. When once being hassled by loony occultists in robes knocking on their hotel room door looking to indulge the band in a black mass of some sort, the Sabs jumped out all at once, blew out all the crackpot's candles and sang Happy Birthday to You. Well, what else can you do? But while the other big bands of the time still dabbled in blues occasionally, Sabbath always kept it heavy. Their first 5 albums are essential. They and others unknowingly invented what we call heavy metal, inevitably a British thing. In between then and the late 90s re-emergence of metal, which has seen the original Black Sabbath finally reform after countless personnel changes during the 80s and 90s, the things that people have gotten away with under the guise of metal The Americans in particular defies belief. Bon Jovi, Poison and Motley Crue are just 3 examples of overproduced pop with guitars and puerile lyrics, more teenage exploitation crap. And then we have the early 80s new wave of British heavy metal bands who are so washed up at that point they started to try to sound like the American rubbish. There is nothing metal about cowboy boots, makeup and lip gloss. Having long hair, spandex pants and a guitar does not instantly qualify as metal. How disgusted we were in 1990 when we tuned into Top of the Pops to see Faith No More and saw Alana Miles, bassist, in a Misfits t-shirt. It made Kerrang! Magazine's mid-80s April Fool joke of reporting that Tom Jones was Sabbath's new singer seem quite feasible. And even though the Anthrax and Public Enemy co-headline tour wasn't quite the metalers and hip-hoppers united harmony it aimed to be, metal bands with scratches are commonplace nowadays, of course. These days, the likes of Slipknot, Marilyn Manson and Limp Bizkit continue to horrify parents and outrage fundamentalists and other loonies in the same way Sabbath used to, while musically trampling the flowers and bells of the last decade down into the ground, while burying the ridiculous kill your ego hippie trip, deliberately avoiding lyrics of hippie idealism and sexual innuendo, as well as happy-sounding chord progressions. Lyrics of nuclear war, nervous breakdowns, drug use, apocalyptic visions and destruction of mankind were a welcome far cry from the usual fast cars and women banalities that wouldn't have fitted Sabbath's low-tuned, evil-sounding doom music from the bowels of hell anyhow. Upon hearing the first LP, Ozzy's dad asked him, "Son, are you sure you're only drinking the occasional beer?" Did they invent heavy metal? Of course. But not on purpose. When asked on an extremely shoddily put-together BBC TV heavy metal documentary in 1988 if he could remember when the term heavy metal was first used, Ozzy replied, "I don't know, but I'd like to find the guy so I could strangle the git." And I couldn't agree more. Best Sab song, amongst many? Wheels of Confusion.